On behalf of the National Eczema Association, I'd like to welcome you all to our Webinar Wednesday presentation, How to Make the Stress Cycle Work for You. I'm your host, Danny Morsehead. Today's webinar is made possible by an educational grant from Sanofi Regeneron. And our presenter today is Summer Forlenza, LMFT. Summer is a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, where she runs a private practice specializing in trauma and chronic illness. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce you to our presenter, Summer Forlenza.
All right. Hi, everybody. Let me get my slides going. And we are just going to jump in. I'm so excited to be here and share this with you. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see this okay. Okay. Actually, I can't see our chat, so I'm going to do my best without.
Good.
What's that? It's good? Okay.
Good.
Oh, there we go. And now I can see our chat. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Alrighty, guys. So I'm really excited to be here and share with you a little bit about the stress cycle. And one second, let me set up my screen exactly the way I want it, so that way I can see everybody the way I want. Okay, I'm not gonna pull it up, but I'm gonna do my best anyway. So my name is Summer Forlenza. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist, and I've been practicing as a psychotherapist since 2017. I have also had eczema for my entire life. So since I was a baby, it's been a big part of my life experience, and it's actually part of what led me to becoming a therapist, my experiences with mental health and my skin. I am a really big believer that when we're working with people who live with chronic illness, and I identify eczema as a chronic illness, that positive thinking and challenging our thoughts about illness can only get us so far. And I know myself and a lot of other people I've worked with have had experiences in therapy feeling like their needs weren't totally met by their therapist who didn't totally understand what it was like to live with a chronic illness. So I really love to help people understand how to work with our body's natural response to stress so that we can actually respond to our big emotions and complete what we're going to call the stress cycle. And I am going to take a second just to reset my screen because I want to make sure I can see your messages during it. So give me one moment here just to address this. Okay, perfect. Let's come back in full screen. Alrighty, friends. So when we're talking about the stress cycle, what are we talking about? What do we mean? So the stress cycle is your body's natural way of moving through stressful events safely. And we are supposed to react when we are exposed to stress. It is not a bad thing that our body has reactions to stress. Those are there specifically to keep us safe and to help us respond to stressors in ways that are actually helpful. Your body always wants to keep you safe. And whenever I find myself getting frustrated with the way that my body responds to stress, I try to come back to this place of recognition that my body's trying the best it can to keep me safe. So when we react to stress, we actually don't have a ton of options on the table for how our body responds to stress. You and I in our minds can come up with all different ways to respond to stress, but the body's physical response, there's kind of a limited amount of options. So we've got our fight, flight, freeze, appease, and flop strategies. We're going to talk a little bit more about those in just a moment. When we are activating these strategies, when our body feels stress and goes into fight mode, for example, that actually can be very helpful if we are faced with a situation where fighting something off would be supportive. What can be difficult is when we live in a world where we live now, where there's a lot of exposure to chronic stress. We're being stressed all the time. And when we live in a body that has big reactions to stress, including skin, I think it's about half of people with eczema report that stress is a trigger to their eczema. I know that's true for me. When I'm stressed, my skin is more red, more itchy. When those two things are happening, we can get stuck in some of these responses. And that can keep us stuck in a place of high cortisol, high stress hormones, tension in the body. And what we're going to learn about today are some ways that we can actually complete the stress cycle. So why is eczema related to this at all? Well, one thing that we know about eczema is that it's not just a physical disorder, it's psychophysiological, which means that what happens in our mind and our psychology can absolutely impact our skin. So when we're very stressed, when we're very worried, when we're very sad, when we're very angry, that can have a direct impact on our skin. And we know that trauma and chronic stress can exacerbate our eczema symptoms. One of the things that happens when we're stressed is a release of cortisol in the body, and this can contribute to inflammation and the disruption of our skin barrier, which is everything when it comes to managing eczema, is managing the skin barrier. I also like to acknowledge that eczema, just in and of itself, living in a body with eczema, can lead to chronic stress just by itself, because having eczema is quite stressful. It has been for me in my life, and I know this is the case for lots of people. So, what is the stress cycle? Let's break this down into some smaller pieces. What are we actually talking about when we're talking about the stress cycle? So the first thing that happens in the stress cycle is a stressor appears. We have some kind of stressor that happens for us. So when we're talking about people with eczema, here are some examples of some common stressors that we might see. I know it can be quite stressful for me when I'm having a scratch attack or I'm really itchy in a public space. That can feel embarrassing for me sometimes. I can have a stress response to that. We can also experience stress when we are exposed to allergens. So if I go to someone's house and they have cats, that's already a stressful event for me because I'm on edge a little bit, kind of waiting for my body to react. People who have eczema can also experience bullying or teasing for our skin. This is especially common in our younger folks with eczema who are in school. It can be stressful as well to experience people wanting to give advice that you know is not actually going to be as helpful as they might want it to be, especially when this is something you're experiencing all the time. I know that when my skin has been, very flared up, I've experienced advice from customers at work, from all kinds of things. And it's not always helpful, and it can be stressful to be experiencing that all the time. And then isolation and depression are really common experiences for people with chronic illnesses and people with eczema, and that can be very stressful on the body. I'm curious for everyone who's here, if you could drop in the chat some other ideas you can think of, things that are stressors, maybe unique to eczema or maybe just in your life. What are some examples of things that are stressful for you or that you will notice? I'm so curious to hear. So we'll keep an eye on the chat to see what people are saying about that and what stressors you guys are aware of. Let's talk about the second part of the stress response after we've had access, the stressor has occurred. And I see someone talking about stressing about not getting enough sleep. So common because we know that eczema can really disrupt our sleep. And there's a lot of stress that can come with that. So one, stressor appears. There's lots of stressors that are unique to eczema. Two, your body responds to stress. And these are the options that your body has. Your body has 5 responses that it can give to any stressor that it wants to use to keep you safe. These are the 5 Fs. So we have the fight response. That is, I have to get ready to fight this thing off. So I always like to use the example of a tiger in the bush. So let's say that we're back in evolutionary times, we're still evolving into the humans we are today, into the bodies we have today, and you're walking around the corner and you see oh, perfect. Okay, the chat's working now. Yay, love that. And you see a tiger in the bush and you come around the corner and your body's like, oh my gosh, if that tiger is real close, you're not going to be able to get away from it. One thing your body might do is prep you to fight it off. So that means that you're going to get your muscles are going to have a lot more energy in them. You're going to get tight. You're going to ball up your fists, things like that. Your body can also use the flight response. That is, oh my gosh, there's a tiger. Let's book it. We have to run away as fast as possible. That's when I'm going to get really tight and tense and ready to run. Your body has a couple other options that are not so active. One of these is the freeze response. The freeze response is basically, oh my gosh, there's a tiger. Let me get really quiet and really still and really stiff. And this tiger is not going to see me and I'm not going to get caught. So that's another way that your body might respond to a stressor, getting tight, tense, and still. Your body can also go into what we call a fawn response. Another way to think about this is appease. And when we're in this state, basically what we're going to do is we're going to try to placate whatever the threat is. This is especially going to happen when we're encountering a threat that's like another person, right? So if somebody's really angry, if your body goes into the fawn response, it's going to do everything it can to calm that person down and make them feel okay. So you're going to worry all about what they need and not very much about what you need in that moment. And then the last response that our body has to go for is the flop response. And this is if that tiger saw me, the tiger's coming, I can't get away. This is when our body goes totally limp. We're going to secrete a lot of stuff that's going to make us not feel as much pain, and we're going to be quite disconnected from the moment. So these are the options that your body has when responding to stress. And again, we have lots of ways that we can think about stress differently, but there's not too many more options for how our body can respond to stressors. So we expose to a stressor, our body activates one of these 5 responses. We get tight and tense, we get totally loose and numbed out, we get frozen, we get really angry, something like that happens. And then the next part of the stress response is actually when the stressor is removed, right? So that tiger walks away, the tiger is gone, right? So we experience a stress, we had a hard night of sleep, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm really stressed about my sleep. The next day comes, that stress has passed. But notice that just because the stress is over does not mean that we have completed the stress response. And this is where we can get stuck, right? So our body is reacting to stress. It's really tight, it's really tense, it's really on edge. And the stressor's gone, but the body remains tight, tense, and on edge. And remembering that when our body is very activated in that way, it can actually exacerbate our eczema symptoms. This is really key to actually do something to help shift our body from one of those flight or fight responses into what we call rest and digest, which is the opposite response. Okay, so this is the 4th part of the stress cycle, and this is where we want to be intentional about doing things that move us out of fight or flight in to rest and digest. We have to be intentional. It's not necessarily just going to happen naturally. So we're going to talk about 7 different ways that are all evidence-based that can help us to complete the stress response and actually move to a place where we are able to be at rest, we're able to relax, our body is able to heal. So the first evidence-based way is to connect with friends, connect with people who care about you. Do something fun together, talk about your feelings, or just spend time around somebody who loves you. One of my favorite ways to do this is to spend time with my nephew. He's 4, he's a delight. I always feel better and my body feels more calm after I spend some time with him. So I'm curious if you can share in the chat, what are some things that you can do with your friends or family when your skin is flaring? And notice that I'm going to ask specifically about what's available to you if you're flaring, because I know there's things that I can do when my skin's pretty healthy that I might not do when I'm really flared up. So I love to go on long walks, for example, but if it's very hot and I'm flaring, a long walk is not going to be the right choice with my friends and family. So I'm curious if there's any ideas that you all have that you could put in our chat. You can share with us a little bit about what you can do. You can share that with us. I'm seeing someone talk about a cold compress. Ooh, we're going to talk about that a little bit in a little bit. Some ways that we can complete the stress cycle. We're looking for what are things we can do together. It's something to think about. Things that I might think about is sharing a meal with friends and family, watching a movie with people, or even going to the movies. I like going to the movies because it's really cold in there, and cold's good for my eczema. Those are some things. That's the first thing we can do, is spend some time with people who care about us. Second thing we can do is laughter. Laughter is another way to complete the stress cycle because it's a signal to our body that we're safe. So again, would love to hear some examples of ways that you guys can use this when you are in a flare. How might you access laughter? Some ideas that come up for me immediately are to watch stand-up comedy, to go and see comedy live if you're comfortable being in public, if your skin's comfortable enough for that. That's one option. I see examples of meme shopping on Instagram. Yeah, going and seeking out funny content. Anything that gets your body to do more than just kind of like a ha, but like actual laughter is really, really good for shifting the body out of fight or flight. TikTok is great for this, watching funny TikToks, funny movies and comedy, anything like that is going to be one way that, again, we're intentionally shifting our body out of fight or flight. Third option that we have here is to be creative, to create art, to create music. When we engage the creative part of our brain, that's a sign to our body that we're not in immediate danger. We don't make art if we're running away from a tiger. So this is a really good one that we can do. And the extra benefit of this is that working with art, creating art and music and dancing is something that can be really, really good just for our emotional well-being in general. So again, would love to hear from you all what kinds of creative activities are accessible to you in a flare. Would love to hear what's an option there. And what I think about when I think about this way of completing the stress cycle is I think about our open mic night at Expo, which I know is always so much fun and such a wonderful night and such a great example of the ways that people with eczema oftentimes are already moving to creativity to find a way to complete the stress cycle. Not that you're putting it that way in your mind, but you'll notice as we go through all of these 7 options that a lot of these are quite intuitive. meditative. And a lot of us already notice in our bodies a change when we're doing these things. So creating art, dancing, singing, drawing, making things with clay, doing things with your hands. I got really into cross stitching for a little while recently because it's very meditative, just cross stitching. Anything like that is going to help you complete the stress cycle, signal to your body it's safe to relax. Fourth option that we have is to hug it out. So this is not just spending time with people, but actual positive physical touch with people who are safe to us. And I love hugs in general because they help our body feel connected to other people, but they also really directly help our body to connect to other bodies that are calm and relaxed and slow down our heart rate, slow down our breathing. So I love getting big hugs from people when I'm very stressed. It's one of my favorite ways to de-stress, to complete that stress cycle, and a really good option if you've got people who love you who want to give you big hugs. I want to encourage you to think of 2 or 3 people in your mind right now who you might ask for a hug when you're flaring. So people who might live with you or live around you who you could access and get a big hug. And then I know that not everyone has access to safe people or might live alone, not always have people around them to do this. And this is where I want to invite you to consider weighted blankets or even weighted stuffed animals if you are alone. Just the pressure of that weight on you is something that can help your nervous system and your body to relax and move into rest and digest. There's these really cute weighted stuffed animals. The brand is called Hugimals, I believe. And I have a big koala. He's really, really cute, and he lives in my office, and my clients get to hold him on their lap or hug him during session. And it's really, really lovely. This one may surprise people. Number 5 might be surprising, but crying is actually an evidence-based way to move out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. So if you've ever heard somebody say, like, stop crying, crying doesn't help, they're not right. They're incorrect. The science does not support that. Crying is really good for us. When we cry, our tears actually secrete stress hormones. So things like cortisol are coming out of our body in our tears. And crying also helps to produce some feel-good hormones and endorphins. So please give yourself permission to cry when you're overwhelmed because you're going to feel better afterwards. Your body's going to feel more relaxed. It can be an uncomfortable experience, but the more that we normalize for ourselves that crying is natural, it's one of our body's natural ways of discharging stress, the more we can accept and allow that to be in our body and to be a part of our routine. I wanted to acknowledge that there have been times where my facial eczema is flaring and crying stings is not actually very comfortable. So this might not work for everybody, and I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that that is a thing for sure. But don't try to stop yourself from crying if you're overwhelmed because it can be really, really good for the body. We have 2 more here. So this one, a lot of you have probably heard about it, but I always like to explain some of the science behind this. Deep breathing is another way that we can complete the stress cycle, help our body recognize I am not in danger at this moment. I can move out of rest and digest and stop producing so many stress hormones and stress chemicals. Especially what I want you to do here if you're going to do any breathing technique is to focus on that long, slow exhale. Because what that does, it helps to signal to our parasympathetic autonomic nervous system that we are safe and it's okay to come out of fight or flight. And especially that long, slow exhale is key there. So we're going to do one together, okay? This is one that I really, really love. And all you need are your hands. So you're going to hold up one hand, and then with the other hand, you're going to take your finger and place it at the base of your palm. And I can't see y'all, but I'm going to invite you to do this with me. And what you're going to do is while you move up the finger, I'll show you first, as you trace, you're going to trace your hand like this. And as you move up your finger, you're going to inhale. And as you move down your finger, you're going to exhale. All right, so we'll just do 3 breaths together now. And I like to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. That's how I often will teach people to do this. So we'll breathe in through the nose and move up. And then nice and slow down. And breathe out. Let's do again, up and in. Long out. Last one for now, up and in. And out. It relaxes me just doing this with you all right now. And there's an added benefit of having some tactile stimulation of hands together. And those ones are really lovely. And this one's just easy to keep in your pocket, and you can give yourself 10 big breaths if you go all through your fingers and then all the way back. If there's any other breath strategies that you've enjoyed, please share them with our group here, because I know there's 1.5 million ways to do deep breathing, and probably lots of people have great ways that you've incorporated this before. I have so many others. I was like, oh, how do I fit everything I want to into this webinar? I can't fit it all, but you can ask me questions during the Q&A and I'll share more. Let's hit up our last one that we're going to talk about right now. And this is engaging your body. So particularly here, exercise is one way that we can really signal to our body that we are not in that danger situation anymore. One way I sometimes think about this is if my body wants me to run away from a tiger, if I do some running or I do some jumping, I get my heart rate up, my body's like, cool, she did it. She got away from the tiger. We can relax now. I want to acknowledge that when eczema is flaring, exercise is not always accessible. I know that's the case for me. When my skin's really flared up, exercise can actually make it a bit worse. So we want to look for some other options where we can engage the body. If anyone has any recommendations for types of movement that you like to do when your skin is flaring, please share that with us. I know that for myself, gentle yoga is something I can do, or stretching, or Pilates, but sometimes it's none of it. Sometimes I'm like, I cannot move my body right now. Everything hurts. So then we have a couple other options that I want to share with you. So one would be this movement that I call yes, yes, no, no, maybe. And this one is pretty cool. So this one is where we're going to just move our head. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this right now, and you can do it with me if you would like. So we're going to move up as we breathe. We're going to look up and just move up with the nose, and then move down, chin to chest on the exhale. Inhale and up. Exhale down. We'll come back to the center, and then we'll look over our left shoulder on the inhale. Nice and gentle. Exhale back to center. Inhale over the right shoulder. Exhale to center. And then maybe we're going to squeeze our shoulders up to the ears. Inhale, and then back and down on our exhale. And we'll do that twice. Squeeze and up. Back and down. I would go a little slower usually. I have a lot of things I'm going to cover, but that's easy to remember. Yes, yes, no, no, maybe. And it's a nice way to sort of loosen up the shoulders and the neck and just access a little movement if you're not too flared up in the neck and shoulders area. Another excellent way to signal to our body that we can relax is doing any form of shaking. So that might just be shaking your arms like this. It also might be shaking your body like this. Sometimes I like to make my arms noodle arms and flop them around and do a little bit of shaking. If you look at animals in nature, especially if you look at like gazelles, antelopes, things like that, if they are chased by a tiger, and they get away, for example, a lot of times you'll see them shaking their bodies, right? There's like some shaking that will happen in nature. And part of what they're doing is they're completing the stress cycle. They're discharging that anxiety and that stress from the body so they can go back to grazing. And so we can do that ourselves as well. Swaying and rocking is another great way that we can activate this part of our body. This is pretty inherent to who we are, right? A lot of times when we're babies, we're rocked or swayed. That's a natural thing we do with children. And we can do that as adults for ourselves as well. And if you have kids, holding them, squeezing, swaying, and rocking can be a really sweet way just to help their body complete the stress cycle. There's another thing called havening touch, which I'm not sure I have enough time to fully go through right now, but I would recommend that you do a little Googling, and you can find a lot of great examples of this on YouTube of how to do this. And basically there's some self-touch on the face, doing a couple of pressure points, and then just moving down the body, and that one's really lovely. And the last one is the butterfly hug. And for this, we're just going to cross our arms over the chest, and we're going to tap back and forth, side to side, kind of like wings of a butterfly. And when we stimulate the left side of the body and the right side of the body back and forth, it helps our brain to relax our body quite naturally. I like to add in some swaying with this sometimes. You see, I just started doing on my own without really thinking about it, but that's always an option as well. So again, if you can access exercise, that's beautiful and definitely something I would recommend. If you can't, you might move to one of these more gentle movements instead. So the phase 5, once we have actually completed the stress cycle, we've signaled to our body we're safe, that's where we actually turn on our rest and recovery system. And that's when our body immune system is improved, our digestion gets better, we're more creative, we can connect with people more easily. All of those things get a lot easier when we're in that rest and digest state. There's a couple signs that your body is in rest and digest. If you have a dog, you'll a lot of times see them kind of settle and do a big sigh, and that's them shifting into rest and digest. We might do the same thing. Yawning is another example of a way that we can tell our body is relaxing. If you find yourself swallowing, like producing more saliva and swallowing more, another good sign that whatever you're doing is working. If you ever do any yoga on YouTube, you will notice that yogis swallow a lot, and that's because their bodies are quite relaxed, and that's a really natural way to show that our body's relaxed. And then any release of tension, if your shoulders come down, if your hands are relaxed, your jaw is relaxed, all of that is a good sign that it's working. You are entering the rest and digest system. I see some folks who are sharing great examples of breath videos you can follow, as well as that acknowledgement, like I sigh like my dogs do. It's so good for us. It's giving us that long exhale, and it's a good way to settle our body. All right, we are now at the point where whatever questions you might have for me about the stress cycle, about stress and eczema, about any recommendations I have for working with stress when you have eczema, this is a great time to ask those questions. So I am all yours and here to answer them.
I'm going to come back on here because we got a few questions on the back end here to ask you.
Perfect.
All right. And you feel free to stop sharing as well if you don't have any more slides after
I'm
this.
going to do that if I can. I can't see my mouse and it's making my life a little more difficult. There we go.
All right. So again, feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box here if you have them. But I'll start us off with these ones. Do you have any tips for incorporating these techniques into my daily routine so that they can become habits?
Yes, I'm so glad that we are get to talk about this a little bit. So one of the pieces of advice that I recommend to folks who are living with a chronic condition is to make stress release and stress relief a part of your daily routine. And so a way that I like to do this is to have a little bit of a habit, or sometimes I use the word ritual because that there's kind of some intention that's connected to that in the morning or in the evening. It does not have to be very long. If we kind of develop a habit of, I wake up in the morning, I do a little shaking, I take a couple breaths, I stretch my body out a little before I make my bed and get on with my day, that is a great way to incorporate that just right away. One way that can make it a little easier to make new habits is something called habit stacking. That's where we take habits that are already ingrained. So like I said, maybe you make your bed every morning, maybe you brush your teeth every morning, maybe you have a cup of coffee every morning. Whatever it is that you're already doing without having to think about it, you add in your new habit you're trying to build directly before or after. A lot of times after is a little easier. So I make tea every morning, so while while the water is boiling, might be a good time for me to do a little shaking, a little sighing, a little stretching, something like that. So stack your new habits into things that are already happening for you, and know that sometimes, like, it's okay if you just are taking 30 seconds to 60 seconds to just incorporate this, because our body doesn't need a lot of information to know that we're safe and to know that we can move into that rest and digest space that's so helpful to be in.
Great. Habit stacking. Love it.
Habit stacking.
All right. There are 3 types of fight or flight responses. Is one better than the other? Is it important to know which one I default to? And should I try to aim for a different response?
Ooh, great question. So a lot of times we don't have control over what response our body goes for. That's not something that we get to pick. Our body is going to make that decision based on what it's perceiving around us, or based on our history of what's worked for us before. So if I got really used to running away from bullies or something like that as a kid, then when I'm an adult, I'm still going to go into a flight response. So we don't actually get to decide what response our body's going to go into, and none of them are better or worse than the other. What can be helpful about knowing which one your body defaults to is that it might help you choose what kind of stress response you're going to take. Because if your body is moving into more of that flop response of I'm totally limp, I'm loose, I have no energy, I'm probably going to move to something different than if my body's in the fight response and has a ton of energy, right? So when I have a ton of energy, I might want to do some intense exercise. I might want to throw things at a wall. I might want to take some big breaths where I'm making a lot of noise. Like lion breath is a thing you can look up, and that's where we make a lot of noise on the exhale. Whereas if my body is responding to stress by shutting down, I might go for something a lot more gentle. So I might ask for a hug from people. I might do something more passive, like just put on some stand-up comedy that's going to make me laugh. But I'm not going to choose something that's going to require a lot of energy of me, because that's going to be a tall order at that moment. So it's good to know where your body defaults, so you can kind of have a sense of which of these strategies is going to be best for you based on how much energy you have access to.
Great. That's so cool, matching the response to the,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Next up, I have heard of fight, flight, or freeze, but fawn and flop are new to me. Are these recent additions, and are they based on research?
I think they are more recent than fight, flight, freeze. And there is research around them. Folks are writing books about this. Folks are doing research into this. And there's a lot of great therapists on social media who are educating about this that you can find. And it's certainly something that we're incorporating in our work. I think it's always so interesting. I know this is the case in any kind of clinical work, but the work that we do and the research that we're doing in our work takes like 10 to 15 years to reach the public. So this has been a pretty common vernacular for therapists and folks working with people with trauma and stress for a long time. And it's just now, I think, starting to hit the public.
Great. All right, next question. Do these tools work for stress prevention? For example, is doing art daily or adding more hugs to my day going to keep me from entering the stress cycle?
Yes. So what I think about this is we are constantly being exposed to stress in the modern world, right? If you watch the news, if you have a job, if you are raising children, you are going to be exposed to stress on a regular basis. And this is where it's really, really helpful to just incorporate this as a habit, because as stress is rising in our body, we're having more cortisol and more stress hormones showing up. We can just discharge those as a matter of routine. Sometimes I share that, there's a couple of, we think about like artists, musicians and artists and things like that who have really high profile, really high stress careers. One of the ways that I think a lot of times those folks are able to sustain careers over a long time is that stress management techniques that we discussed tonight are just a part of their job. So singing, dancing, making art, making music is always happening. And so they're keeping their stress managed on a regular basis. So we can take some advice from that and just incorporate into us. We're not going to necessarily prevent all stress, nor should that be the goal, because our body responding to stress can be very helpful, but we do want to give our body opportunities to discharge that stress.
Great. Love that example about the artists, musicians. All right. What is the best way to find a licensed family therapist specializing in trauma and chronic illness in Ohio, or maybe in my area, just to make it
Yeah,
broad?
great question. And one thing I would really recommend for folks with eczema is to find someone who specializes in chronic illness, because it can be very hard. I know I have struggled in my own life to find a therapist who understands what eczema means, because people will hear the word eczema and can have one image in their mind of what that means. And the day-to-day reality for those of us living with it can often be much different from that. So looking for someone who specializes in chronic illness can help us to find someone who at least has the tools to understand what chronic conditions are like. And there's a couple of directories that I recommend. So one is called Psychology Today, and they have a big directory where you can search by specialty, and I believe chronic illness is a specialty you can search for. There's also a directory called Therapy Den, very similar, and you can put in your insurance, you can put in your location, you can put if you want in virtual or in person, and looking for a therapist who specializes in chronic illness and trauma. And that's what I would recommend, is to go to some of those directories. Before I would go to, like, if you look through your insurance, for example, you might be matched with a therapist who takes your insurance, but they might not know a lot about chronic illness. So I would seek someone out specifically who has that specialty. And almost every therapist I know offers some form of free consultation where we can talk on the phone for 15 to 20 minutes. You can tell us a little bit about what's going on, ask about our expertise, what we recommend, how we would help, and that'll give you a sense if they're the right fit.
Great. All right, next question. Do you have a recommendation for a weighted blanket? How many pounds do you recommend?
What a great question. And my answer is I don't have necessarily a specific recommendation, nor do I have a sense of what the right pounds would be for you. It's so different person to person. But yeah, I think I got mine on Amazon like years ago. I have one, I sleep under it every single night because it helps my body relax. And I don't have any particular recommendations. I don't think there's a huge difference between them either. What I might look for is one that has a cover that you can take off so you can wash it because you can't wash weighted blankets themselves. So you want to get one that has a cover that you can take off and wash in your allergen-free detergent.
Great. Yeah, that's a good eczema friendly tip right there. All right. Oh, here comes a question. When I have longer term stress exposure, I keep reaching for sugary foods in excess amounts, which is not helpful for my eczema. What are some tips for switching craving based habits outside of therapy?
What a great question. And I want to start by just providing a little education that this is super normal. And one of the reasons that we'll go for sugary foods, a lot of times people will go for like sour foods too, like sour candies are really common, is because it actually activates more saliva in our mouth and turns on our digestive system and kind of helps our body to feel like we are relaxing. So binge eating is actually a really common response to chronic stress. And that's one of the reasons why it helps our body to feel more relaxed. Now, the consequence is that later we feel quite sick and we might not sleep very well. And we might have a lot of discomfort. And so it doesn't work in a long-term way, but in that moment, it's really quite effective at reducing our stress. So it's very, very normal. And some things that I think about here is incorporating things that are stress reducing, like any of the things we talked about tonight, but also things into your life that are pleasurable and fun. Because a lot of times when we're seeking that kind of stimulation, we're also looking for something that feels good. And we can really intentionally add in things that feel good, whether that's things like massage, whether that's things like, you can get some of those massage, like shoulder things that I don't remember what they're called. They have those balls that roll around in your neck. You can seek out games. Doing anything that's really fun can also be helpful for this. Outside of therapy, I will just say like binge eating can be something, not to say that you're necessarily experiencing that, but that's part of what I hear when I hear this question. And that can be something that's really difficult to stop on your own. And if possible, to seek support from a therapist, I would recommend. But I would start by adding in pleasure and fun into your life. Noticing that when that's happening, your body wants something to reduce stress. Oh, and another thing that comes up for me is using something cold. So having a popsicle that's cold if you need that oral stimulation, or going for ice packs, because that can also kind of be sort of a shock to the system in a way that like sweet candy and sour things can be as well. So that might be something to think about.
Great. All right, another question here. As we habit stack, is there a recommended amount to add at the same time, or is it better to gradually add them? What method do you suggest?
I would gradually add them because what we're trying to do is make it as easy as possible. And we want to reduce the amount of effort it's going to take for us to sustain the change. Because a lot of times we want to make a change in our lives and we get really ambitious and we're like, yes, I'm going to totally do everything differently. And while the intention there is good, it can lead us to a place of overwhelm and burnout. And then the change isn't sustained. And then we feel really guilty and like we did something bad. And so what we want to do instead is do gradual changes. So pick one thing you're going to change first and make that a new habit for maybe 3 to 4 weeks. We're going to go slow here. There's always a temptation to go fast, but I say all the time in my work that a lot of times slower is faster, because if we go too fast and we overwhelm our system and we don't sustain the change, then it's actually going to take longer for us to reach the goal that we're trying to do anyways. So one at a time, nice and slow, give yourself 3 or 4 weeks till it feels habitual. And then that is going to make it easier to sustain the change.
Great. Okay, next question. Should we find something to cry about, or should we only cry if we feel like it?
You can 100% find something to cry about. Like put on 100%. This is actually really helpful sometimes. Sad music, sad movies. Not that I don't like watching those like videos on TikTok about animals in shelters. I might avoid that. But if it's gonna get you to cry, you can totally seek that out intentionally because it is such a release for the body. So you might pick laughter, but if you're in a mood of like, I need to cry and I can't get myself to cry, or I feel like it would be helpful, seek out some sad media, some Taylor Swift songs, watch The Notebook, something like that.
Wow, that is so interesting. I wouldn't have expected that answer, but great to know. Okay, couple more questions for you here before we wrap up. Can these tools work for more acute stress like like anxiety or panic attacks, or are those more emergency situations?
Good question. They can work, but it really depends on the person. And if you're experiencing panic attacks, you might need a different kind of intervention. Um, and I like to when I things that I use with my clients when panic attacks are a part of what's happening. One is being around people who are calm, grounded, and safe. So like being around friends and family who love you, the hugs, something like that can work. But also in those more acute moments, ice packs are something I turn to all the time. So ice pack on the neck, on the back of the wrists, back of the legs, somewhere where it's really going to grab your body's attention. And also, sour candy is really helpful for a panic attack. So, if you're someone where panic attacks are a part of your life or part of your experience, I keep warheads in my office for this reason in particular. Those are really, really good at interrupting that panic as it's happening. But I also would recommend if panic attacks and big anxiety is a regular part of your life, to seek some support from a mental health professional because that can be really, really helpful in figuring out what's triggering those and some like longer term management.
Great. Okay, last question for you. Maybe we can end with another fun thing here.
Cool.
What is your go-to de-stressing tool? Are there any secret or favorite de-stress tools that you can lead us through?
Ooh. Okay, my actual answer for this is that my very favorite de-stress tool is walking. That is my ultimate go-to, and one of my habits in the morning is to take a walk with the dog. But we can't do that together on this Zoom right now. But it's still my recommendation, and especially walking and listening for bird sounds and not listening to a podcast, which I do not always pull off. But when I do, my body feels really, really good. And there's some really good science behind walking too. So if your body can walk, I would recommend that above almost anything else. But some fun ones, dancing. I think dancing is also something that's really, really fun and really strong evidence base. There was actually some research done on the effects of many different kinds of things, interventions for anxiety and depression, including psychotherapy, including medication, and dance was on that list. And dance was the number one most effective intervention out of anything that they tried for depression and anxiety. And so putting on some fun music, having a dance playlist, or even going out and dancing is probably like one of the best things that you can do for your body and your stress management. And it's like fun. So
What if you combine them? Dance, walk.
yeah, a walking dance, you know. Well, that's a conga line. You've just described a conga line.
Yeah. Great. Okay, that looks like it's the end of our questions. So thank you again, Summer, for helping us getting a better understanding of the stress cycle. And many thanks to you all for joining us today. You can continue your eczema education on our website at nationaleczema.org. You may register for an upcoming webinar or watch the recording of a previous webinar at nationaleczema.org/webinar-Wednesdays. On behalf of the National Eczema Association, thank you all for joining us.